Oh boy, this is very interesting. Charlie Lutz used to talk about the hierarchy, and Mother Divine, or Ma, is at the epitome of the hierarchy. And then there's all of the mystery workers underneath her, angels, whatever. But it's a hierarchy, and in a sense it's a household. But as we know in yoga, there are the householders and then there are the recluses. And in society, we think of the householder, but gays don't have a part of the household. We don't normally accept them, and there's like no place for them, and I figured out why. I'm sorry for the glare. Maybe I should turn around here. There's glare no matter which way I go. Is that any better? There, that's a little better. So why are homosexuals not included in the householder's existence? It's because what we do to look for an example, we look to Indian culture and we find the naked sadhus, which are mostly men, naked, running around, sometimes in small groups, sometimes in pairs, more often than not singular. And I've always wondered if homosexuality is simply an extension of masturbation, because you're not dealing with anyone other than yourself. They're in the likeness of yourself. So it's very much, to me, apparently, a self-oriented pursuit. And it's more a fantasy than reality that you're having sex with somebody else because they're the same gender, so it's really, there's no friction. Everything's easy and there's no challenge, such as there is when you're dealing with somebody of a completely opposite gender-oriented physiology, in which you don't understand where they're coming from and they don't understand where you're coming from, yet you both think you do understand, and it creates all kinds of conflict because it's false reasoning to think that you can even imagine what the other person goes through. It's impossible. It's impossible. Both genders make the same error, and if they do make that extensible error of judgment, then they create their own problems. But if they don't, if they assume ignorance and the impossibility of understanding the opposite gender in their relationship, in their heterosexual or hetero relationship, let's put it that way, whether or not there's sex involved, then they appreciate the fact that there's some things they'll never know, especially about the opposite gender, and it'll continue to remain a mystery, and not try to be a control freak about it and not freak out about the fact that you won't know everything. It'll be impossible because you're not in their physiology. How can you know what it's like? And for my reference there, when I was a kid, I had cognition of self-luminous polyhedra. They were the thoughts of God, nitya aparashaya, unmade by human mind. Perfect diadems of self-luminous polyhedra, jewels of perfection. And each one was about a paragraph. This was on the Gestalt side of the brain that I was experiencing them. But on the linguistic side, you could interpret them in terms of any speech language on earth, doesn't matter which, and the content or the quantity of speech would be about a paragraph, each polyhedra. Now, the polyhedra was a lattice work of self-luminous line segments with vertices. And if you took the point of view, the position of one vertex, and looked along one line segment from that vertex to the opposite vertex, the opposite end of that line segment, along one edge of the self-luminous polyhedra, then you would have the equivalent of one sentence. And if you took and you hopped over to the other vertex on the opposite end and looked in the opposite direction, you'd have its complementary sentence, but it would not be opposite. And you cannot predict what that complementary sentence concept would be. You can't. The only way to know is if you knew you had the whole entire understanding of the entire polyhedra in your awareness, the context, in other words. Or you knew you'd already had the experience of being in the opposite point of view, looking in the opposite direction along that same line segment. You cannot predict it, though. You cannot infer it. It cannot be implied. The understanding cannot be implied. Well, I mean, you can imply it, but you won't be able to infer it. You won't be able to derive it. You won't be able to understand it. You can only experience it. It's the only way to know it, is to experience it firsthand. And then you can make judgments. Otherwise, don't even bother. And so many arguments, human arguments, are based on the presumption of assuming you know what the opposition is thinking. If you're not in their point of view, forget it. And you can't imagine. Don't even try. Imagination is no substitute for experience. It's none. It's zero. Yet people do it all the time, and they get into arguments because of their presumptuous line of reasoning. They think they know what the opposition is, where they're coming from. Bogus. Totally bogus. But I knew this as a 5-year-old. Anywho, so where was I? I think. Oh no, I may have to stop the video and go back and listen to what I was saying. Well, I was talking about hierarchy and family life, householder existence versus homosexuals who are really outside of the family tree. When you think about it, they're not going to give birth to children, right? So they're not part of any lineage anymore. They're like a dead end, as my cousin would say. But that's what sadhus are. And that's why they go around naked. Now, I insist on being a nudist. Anybody claimed I was a homosexual, and I thought, what? Are you kidding? I'm a loner. What do you mean? A homosexual? It doesn't make any sense. It's almost as if homosexuality would be the fantasy of getting back into the hierarchy without actually getting back into it, which is kind of a contradiction when you think about it. But let's think about the fact that in yoga there is the dakshina, and there's the other term, I can't remember. In other words, there's the right-hand path and there's the left-hand path. The right-hand path is you follow the order of society. The left-hand path is you do everything the opposite. And anywhere in between, in which you pick and choose where you choose to be in opposition to society and where you choose to conform. So, but if we're just talking about concepts, then we can afford to be black and white, but in real life, nothing's black and white. But if we just want to understand concepts, that's okay, so long as we're just dealing with concepts and don't force concepts as labels onto people, because it doesn't work that way. So if we're just studying the concept and we want to make it black and white to understand the concept, then we can say that a reclusive way of life is not a householder, and it's a rebel, in a sense. You're rebelling against society. But you're not contesting society. See, now, a homosexual would be contesting society. In other words, he's a rebel. But a recluse is not contesting anything. He's just walking away and choosing to be a loner. So there's a lot to be said about the similarity between naked sadhus and homosexuals and recluses, and the left-hand path, in which the socialization that we are accustomed to, the right-hand path, conformity, is not being followed. So where was I going with this? Right. I was somebody was narrating the other 2 days all about Mother Divine and this and that and the other thing.